All right, but it's 1 minute past the hour, so let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to CQ Across Generations. I am Benjamin Krzywicki, the marketing manager here at the Cultural Intelligence Center. I've been here for a few years, and it's been a tremendous honor to learn about CQ and everything that comes with it. Outside of work, I do cover international hockey as a writer and work in the sport. And that's what really drove me to the CQ Center. I already do something where so many people from different nationalities, generations, and everything have to come together to win as a team. And learning and finding out about CQ, I was like, well, this is just the perfect fit for everything that I already enjoy doing. And it's been such an honor to get to learn and kind of grow in that space. And that's what's so cool about our panelists today. We have Dr. Maggie Mahoney and also Buhle, who actually was my facilitator when I got certified in cultural intelligence. So amazing to have him on the panel today. But so let's start. Dr. Maggie Mahoney, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks so much, Ben. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today to talk about CQ Across Generations. I'm Dr. Maggie Mahoney. I'm the Director of Global Engagement at the University of Houston, and I'm also a certified CQ facilitator. We use CQ at the University of Houston in many of our programs, and it's something that I've been using in my research for some time now. Very excited to get together, especially as a supervisor, a leader, and as a proud elder millennial, to share in this conversation today here from Houston, Texas. And then Boulay.
I'm glad.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Maggie, Dr. Maggie. And from now on, I'll refer to you as Maggie. And my name is Buhle Dlamini. And for those who might be struggling to twist their tongue to make that sound, Buhle is how it sounds like, Buhle. And then, yeah, as if that wasn't hard enough. And then you've got Dlamini as the last name. That where I come from in South Africa, that's as common as John Smith in England, I guess. So I am Zulu from South Africa. I am a master facilitator with the Cultural Intelligence Center. I'm based in Nova Scotia, Canada, where I am president of Mindgrow Consulting, the company that I run as a professional speaker, facilitator, and trainer. I work with corporations across the world. I speak at conferences, and I get the privilege of doing most of the certifications for the Cultural Intelligence Center. So some of you on this webinar might have seen my mug, and you've heard my story before. So it's so great to be joining in this conversation. But a very interesting piece about the intersection between CQ and generations for me is that, maybe unbeknownst to you, Ben and Maggie, is that when I started this work, when I started speaking professionally, one of the first things that I was speaking on was the generational framework. Back in the early 2004 was the first time I made a presentation about Mind the Generation Gap with my friend and colleague who wrote the book on the generation gap, Graham Codrington. And so over the years, I've spoken about generations. And so the CQ piece just comes in, and it's such a perfect combination. So I'm excited about today. Okay, I'll stop talking. Over to you, Ben.
No, it is going to be a great thing. You know, that experience is especially why we're honored to have you on the panel today. And we're going to start off today with a poll. And so this poll should pop up on your screens here in a moment. And, you know, when you need to address a colleague, you're having some kind of work issue, what communication channel are you using to do that? So we'll give everyone just about a minute here to answer the poll. You know, you can go phone, email, in person, instant messaging, social media. Are you sending them a text? That social media one I expect to be the lowest. If I just had to put in a prediction here, I would hope no one contacts me on my personal social media. Maybe LinkedIn. I'll accept LinkedIn. But I don't know if I'd accept anything else.
That's interesting.
In person is taking it strongly so far.
Would you consider WhatsApp like social media not appropriate for work, Ben?
I would consider that text or instant messaging. I would go WhatsApp.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. But yeah,
it's a mixture.
Yeah, but you don't want someone calling you on your WhatsApp at work.
No, that's where we'll drop the divide as we get the poll results here. In person is the clear winner with 54% of the vote right now, followed up by email, and then phone call and instant messaging tied, text messaging coming down at the end, and then no one said social media. So I'm glad we all have set clear
Thank goodness.
boundaries to not message each other on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, or whatever other site you're using.
Yeah.
Oh,
No
you're
Snapchatting your
prudes.
colleagues.
Come on.
But communication styles are one of the big places that we see generational divides happen, especially something like phone calls or something that younger generations, they almost have a lot of dread that comes with them. There's a lot of fear associated with them that if I'm getting a phone call, I've done something wrong, where that's something more typical, normal for an older generation. Same with those in-person meetings, where maybe on the other side of that, older generations see instant messaging or things like Teams, texts. Those can be more ignored until you're ready to actually give a proper response instead of something urgent that needs to be replied to.
Yeah.
And so with that, I did want to go into our first question here. Both of you have a lot of experience now facilitating and teaching cultural intelligence to generations around the world. So how have you seen generational differences arise, and how can cultural intelligence help bridge those gaps?
Excellent. Great question to start with here, Ben. So let me start by clarifying, before we can just talk about the challenges that it creates, let me start by clarifying what actually makes generations different in the first place. Because I think we often skip this step. I mean, there's so much going on, and we've heard so much about generations. So the generational framework is really a way for us to understand why we don't understand people who are older and younger than ourselves. And, here's what I mean. Have you ever been like in a meeting and just wanted to scream, why can't everyone just be normal? And by normal, of course, you mean like you. We've all been there, right? And it turns out that whatever was happening in the world during the time that you were growing up, so your formative years, roughly between the ages of 5 and 20, that's what shaped your worldview, your values, your definition of what's normal. And over the last century, what's really been interesting is that each generation has grown up in a world that looks fundamentally different from the generation before. And so that gap, which is roughly about 15 to 20 years, that's where the generational clusters then come in, and the ones that were just shown on the screen earlier. So even if everyone in your office shares the same cultural background, which is very rare, by the way, these days, you may not share the same generational worldview. And that's where the friction often starts. And so think about a baby boomer or Gen Xer manager might look at a younger team member and perceive them, to be lacking in loyalty. But here's the thing. Ask a boomer to define loyalty, and they might say loyalty means staying with the same company. And then ask a younger employee the same question, and they might say to you, giving everything I have while I'm here, that's loyalty. Same value, but completely different expression of it. So that's not a character problem. It's actually a generational worldview problem. And it gets even more layered when you factor in the cultural background. And CQ research actually shows that cultural values, including how people relate to hierarchy and authority, vary significantly across national backgrounds. So we call that power difference. So including how people relate to authority and so on. So a Gen Zer professional from a culture where respecting seniority and authority is deeply embedded may actually be more formal and respectful towards leadership than a baby boomer from a culture where challenging your boss is completely normal and even encouraged. So that's where the intersectionality of all of this comes in. But sometimes people from different ethnic or national backgrounds have more in common with each other because of their generation. Because they were born during the same era and so on. So this illustrates that intersectionality. So this is where CQ comes in. CQ gives us the framework to navigate all of that complexity without flattening people into stereotypes. And I think that's such an important thing to remember, that each individual that you're dealing with might be from a different cultural background, might be from a different generational background, but it doesn't mean that whatever you know about that culture or about that generation applies to them completely. And so CQ gives us these four things. First, CQ drive, which allows us to stay curious and not judgmental. Second, CQ knowledge, which helps you to understand what shaped the person in front of you. Third, CQ strategy, which makes you to think before you react, and CQ action, which allows you to adapt your approach. You might note the way that I'm counting might be very different from how you count using your fingers in your culture as well. So generational diversity isn't a problem to solve. I often say it's an intelligence waiting to be unlocked if you have the CQ to access it. I know it's a bit of a long answer, but that's really where we start in this conversation. Maggie.
Buhle, I think that that's such a great perspective. It's not a problem to solve, but it's something to unlock so that we can navigate it well. So working at a university for almost 20 years now, I've seen generations come and go, honestly, working first with millennials and now working with Gen Z and almost to Gen Alpha, but also working with tenured faculty and university staff people who've been here for 40 years. The work across generations can be really distinct. But I do think that at times we can be really good at working across generations at a university because that's our currency, that's our focus, our mission. But whenever we teach CQ here at the university, we teach it not like rocket science. I make sure the first thing I share is this is not hard, but sometimes it's really hard to be intentional. And so today, I hope that we know that we just need to make space to be intentional about this because it's so important to be able to think about these things, factor them into what we're doing. And so I wanted to share a quick stat from Lindsay Pollack, who's a multi-generational workplace scholar. She said 50% of young adults dismiss the abilities of their older colleagues, while 70% of older employees dismiss the capabilities of their younger team members, right? So think about that in your workplace setting and how does that impact things? And how are you being intentional to maybe stop the dismissing of colleagues around you and work with them? And how do we work with them? That's what we're going to talk about. And that's where CQ comes into play as a really great framework.
Yeah, I love both of those answers so much because I think it's always interesting too to hear how people kind of interpret those four components and what they say they describe. Because the answer is always the same, but those words are different, and like it always gives new meaning to them and new motivation to continue to want to apply them. And that Maggie, that statistic you're talking about is wonderful because it does kind of lead into like what we're talking about next. And in your job, as you mentioned, you've worked with millennials, Gen Z, and now you're about to start going into that Gen Alpha. The new generation is coming. They're hitting the workforce and they're definitely hitting college. So why is it so important to build that foundation early on of CQ? And how do you help them take that first step in cultural intelligence?
So the short answer to that is that it gives them more time to be good at this to help long-term career success, long-term relationship and life success. So whenever we teach CQ and global competence development at my institution, we frame it like a muscle. So I literally am up there in front of the students, the faculty staff that I'm teaching to, and I say, this is your CQ. And how strong is it today? How have you been working it out? It's a muscle that you strengthen and train. We can't bench press 100 pounds unless we train for it. And if we stop training for it, we're going to stop being able to lift that 100 pounds, right? So similarly, strengthening and establishing your CQ early on, it helps your work, your relationships, your leadership style, right? I also talk to the students about it helps them fall in love. It helps them keep and make friends. It helps them connect across their communities, as well as being successful in the workplace and becoming a strong leader. Just because you're in a supervisor position doesn't necessarily mean you're a strong leader. And so how are you working out your CQ muscle to be able to do that? It leads to higher career gains over time. If you start younger at this, if you start thinking about this in high school, even in college, and you start thinking about cultural differences, your drive, your curiosity, your perspective taking, the knowledge that you have about other cultures, how you prepare yourself to go into a setting and how well you do in that setting. If you start thinking about that earlier on, it's going to make you more successful through your career. If you think very academically, you would either go on more of a flat rise of an angle, and I'm not at the right angle for my camera, or you go at a higher rise, right? It helps you succeed more quickly to be able to find that strength. And I think the other part of this too is finding your authenticity, finding your authentic voice, because you have time, you have more time and lower stakes positions to make mistakes. So you're trying to connect across difference, you're trying to connect with a boomer who doesn't quite get you as a young worker, and you end up making fun of them for their technological savvy, right? Or you disconnect with them on something. You have the opportunity to recover from that and to continue to find your authentic voice in how you connect with people and work through that as a younger employee. So starting early gives you so many more opportunities to be able to be good at this and use this in your future. And Buhle, what do you think on that?
I absolutely agree with that, Maggie. I love the muscle, and so I'm gonna be trying to do that now more often. I'm gonna be walking around showing my guns, you know. But
it makes them laugh, especially at the beginning of the session.
that's really a great way to think about it. I agree that the earlier you develop CQ, the longer your runway for relevance, really. Because curiosity is your career asset, and so CQ actually positions you as a person who comes into every interaction with that curiosity, comes into every interaction with the desire to want to know more, to increase your CQ knowledge. It makes you come into every interaction with that strategic way of thinking, of saying, okay, how do I plan for this engagement? And it also allows you to come into every interaction with that ability to adapt, which is your CQ action. So I'll just add that there's also a behavioral preferences layer to this. And that's important for professionals to understand, that as you increase your CQ muscle as you're starting in your career and as you're growing in your career, you also then start to bring in the understanding of how different behavioral preferences show up across cultures, but how also those different behavioral preferences show up across generations. So before I talk about that, I mean, I can't be on a webinar in the middle of June in 2026 when the World Cup is going on and not talk about that, okay?
Yes, so true.
Welcome, everybody.
So true. And
I
right
hope
here in
your
Houston,
team is
too.
doing great.
Tough win for US last night, but that's all right. I mean, tough loss. Oh, tough loss for the US last night.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry.
It's all
to
right.
the US. I'm sorry to the US. But South Africa won.
Yes.
And Canada won. And so I'm in a real pickle because South Africa and Canada are facing each other. Okay, I digress. Let's come back.
No, that's so okay.
So yeah, those behavioral preferences really, they do play into the way that we do this. And so you might be coming from a culture where hierarchy is key. Kind of the joke that we had before the webinar is that, Buhle, you're going to call me Dr. Maggie the whole time because from your culture, you keep the hierarchy, you keep the power differential there. I'm from South Louisiana, where there's a very flat power differential. And so it really does depend on where you come from. And so how do we move past that, especially for our young people? Think about the younger folks in your offices, the younger folks you might be teaching or working with, mentoring. Have you taken a moment to point this out to them, to maybe even get them into a CQ training? But if you don't do that, even taking an opportunity to teach them, not that this is rocket science and not that you're speaking down to them, but you're making a space with them to be intentional, to think about their drive, that curiosity that you said, curiosity is your career asset. I love that.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, think about you speaking about communication preferences, for example. So let's think about it. Baby boomers, Gen Z typically prefer direct formal communication, email, structured meetings, clear agendas. And many millennials and Gen Z might lean towards instant, informal, collaborative. Now, of course, we don't want to, put everybody in the box, but be aware of these behavioral preferences, just even in communication. Neither style is unprofessional. And so this is where often the challenges come, is that when we become judgmental. when we start calling, certain team members unprofessional because their behavioral preference is different from our own. And so the earlier then we learn to think about this, the better. When you understand these cultural and generational patterns, these as generational patterns or maybe cultural patterns, not as personal flaws.
Exactly.
You stop trying to fix people and start finding ways to actually connect with them. And I think that's quite an important one.
I think it takes intentionality. I think it takes you growing and changing and seeking to understand more. I remember I've adjuncted a few times, and in one of my classes, I had a really hard time with my students using laptop, but they were taking notes. And so I had to find a way to trust. They had to find a way to demonstrate. We had to meet in a space, not even necessarily in the middle. Times are changing, and how are we adapting to that, and how we're being thoughtful on it to not have that bias and thinking that people are unprofessional for using an iPad in the middle of a work meeting, or for bringing 16 pieces of paper. I know you can hardly see this to a meeting. You look unorganized, but in my generation, that's what we did. That's what we do.
Oh, not the paper.
I love it. Oh,
I appreciate the ready prop. I appreciate it being ready.
I have, yes.
But those examples are so great, especially on the preference side, because when you're trying to get communication, sometimes that's where you do have to adapt. Again, like if you're only soliciting opinions or feedback through one channel, that's where you have to say, okay, we have to flex how we're getting these ideas to make sure that everyone is speaking and that we're getting ideas from across the organization or across the group. It can be flexing just even how you're setting up those communication channels. And then the muscle is that's just the best example we have. I mean, because it also goes to, if you don't keep training a muscle, or maybe you stop training it, you're going to go down. It's going to regress a little bit. I remember, when I had knee surgery, had to physical therapy back up, not using my leg for that long. And it's the same with your CQ. And that's also okay with your scores as well. If they go up and down, they're going to fluctuate over time. You're going to have experiences in your CQ journey where things cause your scores to drop at times.
Absolutely.
Or a new experience makes you doubt some of your skills that you thought you had beforehand. And I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Ben, I think while we're still sort of like on these preferences as well, there's another one that comes up, there's how different generations relate to time and focus, for example. Where maybe all the professionals might prefer doing one thing at a time. A scheduled meeting has a start time, an end time, and a clear purpose. Whereas maybe some of the younger professionals might thrive more on flexibility and parallel activity. So then that's where you see the monochronic and the polychronic coming in, even if people are from the same cultural background, but then because of the different generations but that also doesn't mean that everybody in that generation is like that. You might find that even within generations, some then are more monochronic and polychronic and so on. But this is where many younger professionals might thrive on that flexibility. So it means like while you're in a meeting, taking notes, you might be responding to messages simultaneously and completely on top of all the other things. And so that's the polychronic part. And sometimes for older generations, they might be sitting there and saying, like, why are they on their technology the whole time, and getting really, really frustrated and thinking they're not being professional or they're not paying attention. And so you have this whole generation that's grown up multitasking, and they're used to multitasking. And so it's not a problem for them. And they're totally being professional, but also connecting with friends and connecting. It's all part and parcel of their day.
Yeah.
And can be a big challenge. Yeah, Maggie. Yeah.
And I think, one of the ways as a supervisor that we can connect with that is by being clear on our expectations, by seeking to understand, but then sharing what is the need of the workplace. Because there are workplaces that are more flexible. Like I feel universities are a little bit more flexible than other places that are very corporate, very set, very process oriented, that need to have the structure that is needed. And you'll need to fit into that to work effectively. And so how do we get that clarity? That takes intentionality again, understanding what you're looking for, what the disparities might be, and making sure that we're touching on those.
And company culture often comes in. I see someone
Oh,
asking about
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about, generations and how we fit into different workplaces. The way that we approach our workplace also depends on when we entered the workforce and what kind of space we entered in. So I started working as a high schooler and in office in the summers, but it was a very old school workplace. It was a very non-computerized, very southern in South Louisiana, and very hierarchical, and it was a very different workplace than many others around the US at the time because of the culture that we started in. And so I was trained in that earlier on, and that's made me more effective in certain spaces, but also less effective whenever it comes to more technologically advanced offices. And so I've had to be intentional. I've had to get curious so that I could succeed.
Yeah, and while we're still on that, I think what often sometimes comes up is this question of the organizational culture, and this is where organizations need to be really, really careful. And what do I mean by that? Is that sometimes we use the phrase organizational culture and what's professional and what's not professional as a way of imposing certain behavioral preferences on everybody.
Say it again, Buhle. That's so challenging for so many people. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it is. It is because so that's that, and so the organization of the future, the organization of today, the organization of a technological era that we're finding ourselves in really needs to find new ways of defining what does the corporate or the company culture or the company way of doing things looks like.
Yeah.
And so if we're serious about being inclusive organizations, if we're serious about belonging, we will actually not use the phrase or this term of company culture as a way of weeding out or forcing people out. And so you might find that other people will find it difficult to fit into the culture. Now, are you gonna lock out a whole generation out of your workplace because of the company culture that prefers a certain behavioral preference? So that's where the challenge comes in. And I think for our HR professionals on the webinar, these are some of the things that we really need to think about in terms of how do we bring that conversation into our organizations, so that we allow that inclusion to continue to take place. Yeah, I know. Ben, we've kind of like hijacked you here, so we'll pull back.
But I think that's a great
it's
lead into the next question. But that's so
It's
important to make sure that we are working effectively across difference and not being exclusionary, and not bringing bias into our hiring and team preferences and practices.
Absolutely.
It is a wonderful statement, because again, it is sometimes that I can understand the need or the want to have a cultural fit, someone who you think is going to seamlessly slide into your team. But there is a lot of value in a cultural ad as well. It's not always just a difference. It can be an ad that changes your team and helps them grow and finds new efficiencies, find new ways to do things, and really keep building that team up. And I think that actually does really kind of go into our next question. We've talked about the younger generation building that foundation, but CQ is a lifelong developable skill. So why is it still important for people maybe at the later stages of their career or getting ready to exit the workforce, still important to build that CQ?
Yeah. Why is it important? Because the world didn't stop changing when we got good at something.
Oh, yes.
And I think that's often the way that we think about experience. We think that experience, because we got good at doing things a certain way, we got good at doing, that means that no, the world is changing. And so how people are showing up to work is going to continually change.
Yeah.
And so that means that what worked for me and all of the CQ skills that I developed and over the years, and that worked and that served me well when I was working as a Gen Xer, maybe working with the new millennials, and I was trying to adopt. Now there's a whole new generation that's coming after the millennials, the Zers, the Gen Z, and they're very, very different. And now I have to learn all over again. I'm sorry for those older folks like me, the grandpas on the webinar. We have to keep learning. And so one of the hidden risks of experience is that it can quietly turn into certainty. And certainty stops asking questions. And so a big part of CQ is ongoing, unrelenting curiosity. And so here's what I mean by that. A seasoned leader from a culture where maybe leadership means having all the answers and may walk into a room of Gen Z employees who expect their manager to say, I don't know, let's figure it out together. That leader isn't wrong for having confidence. That served them well in the past and it worked well. But now they're now working with a whole new generation. And if they never develop the curiosity to understand what their team actually needs from them today, they'll keep losing people and they can't afford to lose. And so that means I have to adapt my CQ to actually interact with a whole new generation. So the Cultural Intelligence Center research reminds us that cultural values around leadership, communication, and relationships don't disappear just because someone joined a new company or moved into a new country. They show up every day in how people give feedback, how they handle conflict, and how they respond to change. And so this is something that we just have to keep growing. We have to keep learning. We have to keep challenging ourselves. And so that experience that we have is important, but it shouldn't keep us captive or prisoner to how we've done things before. Yeah.
So well said. Buhle, the chat is blowing up at your statement. Certainty stops asking questions. And we can't do that. And in my thought, we don't want to be a victim of our generations. We don't want to be stuck where we are. We don't want to be a victim of expertise either. I'm so I very much admire many of the faculty here who have been doing the research for years and years, but they continue growing as they discover new things, as they discover and adapt new ways of doing research and sharing and teaching. It's really impressive to watch them intentionally grow through this. You can, as an older employee, as an older person, always come back to strengthening your CQ muscle, right? And if you're at the place where it's 5-pound weights, I'm not judging, right? We got to keep them working out, and you can use your CQ knowledge to start asking questions. That drive is pushing you to be curious. The knowledge seeking is teaching you how to use different technologies, how to communicate. And then your strategy here, your planning for an interaction, but also your awareness so that you don't try to clock it in the middle of a meeting and sound cool to someone.
Yeah.
Do that, right? Don't use some slang that makes you feel inauthentic, right? But be truly connected with others. You can keep on working on that through generations. And honestly, I think that action is what's going to keep our workforce strong and keep those who are in the workforce but looking at retirement and the next number of years really fulfilled as they complete it out. I have a dear friend and she's an older person, and she's having a hard time in her workforce right now. And thinking about this right at the same time this webinar, we've been having conversations about the multi-generational workplace and how does she adapt. She didn't even know, but of course is what she said. Of course I need to, okay, that makes sense. Again, it's not rocket science, but being intentional to check up on yourself. How is my curiosity? Am I taking all the perspectives? Am I seeking to learn and understand? Am I seeking out that knowledge? Am I aware if I'm not coming across in the way that I want to be? And then how do I act? How do I show my activeness? How do I show my leadership through all of that, right? Because that action piece, your verbal, your nonverbals in a meeting, in an interaction with a supervisor, you might think, but maybe you need to lean in more. Maybe you need to step back more. And so using that CQ, it can help adjust, and that can create so much more fulfillment in the end of your career. It can create so many more opportunities to have a truly successful, strong end to your career or as you're getting older. I don't think that there's any point that we should stop using our cultural intelligence to help us be more effective in our teams.
Yeah.
and our relationships, our families, our friends. And someone even said in the chat, in grocery stores and banks, customer service, grandkids.
Yeah.
Grandkids.
Yeah.
I'm sure they teach you a lot. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm a grandfather, by the way, proud grandfather. So as a grandfather, I'm learning a lot from my grandkids. They're so fascinating and so exciting. But talking about that, the whole point about mentorship, the way that we've always thought about mentorship is that the older mentor the young.
Yep.
Yeah. and
Yep.
and 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 we are now living in a world where we actually have to change some of the way that we think about that. Mentorship goes both ways. And so we need to be finding ways where we use our experience for those who are more experienced in the corporate work to actually pass what they know to the next generation instead of being judgmental, and which sometimes we can tend to be as older generations. I can't believe as a Gen Xer, I'm referring to myself as the older generation. But hey, you know, we are forever young as Gen Xers, but the truth is we are old now. We're the old guys in the room. But as older generations, it's really about us then saying, okay, what can I bring that I know and share with the next generation? But also, what can I learn from this new generation? And how can I open myself to that? Yes, we are the vintage.
Yeah. Well, then I think that leads so well into our next question, if you wanted to bring us there.
Yeah, and definitely read the chat. You're getting tons of compliments. You know,
Yes.
no one thinks you're vintage at all yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me really quickly here, because I want to make sure I get the numbers right here. There was a Gallup poll recently done among Gen Z, and the feelings they have towards AI, and again, it wouldn't be a 2026 podcast without mentioning AI, get the
Yes.
SEO mentioned in there. But they're becoming more and more concerned with the AI technology. 42% of those polled are anxious towards it, and even 31% are angry about it. Only 27% even say that they're hopeful about the technology. You know, and this is despite a lot of them acknowledging that they heavily use AI for their school or entry-level job work. And when we look at other polls, Pew Research Institute did a lot, we see that older generations are even more anxious about this technology, though typically more understanding of it once they get it explained and learn more about it. But so, you know, this is not the first or last thing that's going to create technological divide among generations. So how do we use cultural intelligence when the feelings towards this technological advancement are so anxious or even like people even angry about it? Because it's here no matter if we want it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is here. And this is where generational worldviews become generally fascinating and where CQ is most urgently needed. Yeah, you know, I know that my friend and colleague Quentin Pretorius is on the call. He did the previous webinar, and so now I get to give a shout out to him on this one. But I know that he needs a lot of help with this, you know, because it's one of those that's maybe a little bit skeptical about this all AI and so on, but he's using it as well. So we have some generations are having this mixed relationship with this. But let's be honest, AI is not just a technology conversation. For many people, it's an identity conversation. Think about it.
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Think about it. Someone who has spent 30 years developing their deep expertise, whether as an accountant, a writer, a trainer, an analyst, and then hears that AI can do a version of what they do better with more accurate research backing it. And that's not just a workflow disruption. That's a deeply personal question. What am I worth now? Like all of this experience, all of this work. So there can be anger, there can be frustration, there could be all of those things. And so the research from the World Economic Forum has shown us that 85 million jobs may be displaced by AI. But then it also says that 97 million new roles will emerge, which looks like net positive on paper. But here's the problem. The people most at risk of displacement are often mid to late career professionals, while the new roles tend to favor those that are from the younger generations. And so there's some challenges there. But here's the generational piece. And this one might surprise you. Gen Zs and millennials, use technology constantly, of course, but that doesn't mean that they trust AI without question. Research actually shows that younger generations are actually more vocal about AI and ethics and algorithmic bias and data privacy than older generations. They grew up watching social media on a scale we're still measuring, but they've seen tech promises go sideways. So their relationship with AI is generally excited and generally skeptical at the same time. My son, my 15-year-old, is a prime example of this. He's actually quite angry about some aspects of AI, and because he is seeing his future, like he wants to be in art and all of that sort. So the mistake organizations make is that they roll out AI training and expect adoption, but they skip the most important step. Listen first. Instead of leading with how, here's how Gen AI, how AI is, a CQ-informed leader will say, what concerns you most about this? Connect with the different generations, connect with them. What would you need to feel confident using this? And what do you bring to the work, to the workflow that AI generally cannot replace? And so the challenge has never really been AI. The challenge is managing human responses to change. And that's exactly where CQ can help us a great deal here.
The challenge has not been AI. It's been managing the human response to it. I couldn't say that better, Buhle. You're getting some really great quotes in here. And I just want to make sure that we emphasize and really focus on that. The issue, I think someone asked me to repeat it. It's not a challenge with AI. It's a challenge with the human response to AI. I see that in my office and within my friends, my peers at the university, of older peers not really knowing what does AI do, but knowing that it's scary, understanding that it might take their jobs, and then digging into that, seeing the tools that it can provide for our team. It's been a wonderful exploratory experience to be able to understand, here's how we can use AI here. This is what it's doing. It actually can make our work a little bit easier because many people consistently work in a space where they have to do more with less. And AI can help do that, that makes it less painful for us. But if we don't know what it's doing, if we don't know how to use it, if we don't teach, right? If we just thrust upon, and we don't get intentional about it, or as the receivers of AI, if we don't use our curiosity and seek to expand our knowledge so that we can act on it, if we're just resistant of it, have a bias towards it, we're not going to be able to really integrate into this. I think about some of our friends' parents whose jobs were eliminated as factory workers. And Ben, the CQ Center is up in Michigan where cars are made, right? And so whenever
Motor City.
factories were made more efficient, people lost their jobs because of that efficiency, because of that development and technology. We've seen that repeated with the creation of the internet, computers becoming more accessible and affordable. We've seen that change in the workforce with social media, and the way that we have high-speed internet and moving from phones to cell phones and being more connected. And so this is another one of these technological movements that is going to scare if we're not prepared. And so using CQ to be prepared for this, but thinking of ourselves as not only team members, but leaders. And again, you can lead to others around you, even if you're not their boss. If you're good at it, share. If you're scared of it, ask. Using CQ so that you can engage in this well to make sure that you stay effective and included as we all kind of navigate. What does this mean for our workforce? I think that approach is going to be beneficial for us as we start digging in even further to what does AI mean for our jobs.
And so to go back to that question, how does CQ help us to bridge the gap?
Yeah.
When people are anxious and feeling angry around AI, I think it's just about going back to the capabilities again and using them. And so starting with that CQ drive and sort of like the curiosity piece.
I also want to add into the curiosity though, the self-efficacy piece.
Yes.
My older friend that I was talking with, her self-efficacy is really low. She's older, she just doesn't know, and she sits in that lack of self-confidence space, the self-efficacy can really help us expand into this, because we might be curious, but we may not have the confidence to speak up and ask and try because we don't want to break it, or we don't want to do something wrong. Self-efficacy is huge in doing this in a new space and connecting across difference.
So Maggie, let's stay with that just a little bit about the self-efficacy piece. So then what does it mean? Like, we know that in CQ, when we say self-efficacy, we're talking about your confidence, about increasing your confidence. And so when it comes to cultures, generally what that usually means for us is that we ask more questions, so that the next time we engage with someone from that culture, we're feeling a little bit more confident to step into that. And so when it comes to the AI space, increasing your self-efficacy really means experimenting more. It means challenging yourself. It means it doesn't mean that, you know, you're gonna now go from this call and you're gonna have an AI, you're gonna have 5 AI agents that do all of your work and stuff. I wish I could do that, all right? But
it's
it
so
does
fascinating, but it's not.
it might just mean that I'm gonna go from this call and say, okay, let me use my CQ drive to actually increase a little bit, experiment a little bit more in terms of how I'm using AI, just taking the email that I was going to send and putting it into something that maybe I haven't done before. I haven't plugged it into Claude. I haven't plugged any of the things because I'm so adamant that it has to be authentically me and stuff. They might mean just practicing and experimenting a little bit more. So again, so that's how CQ can, so you can start with the CQ drive and then you go on to use all of the sort of
absolutely
like aspects.
And you know, as we think about older workers in the workforce, there's an area of vulnerability there where they might be scared to mention that they don't know. That might be detrimental to their careers, to admit that they're not sure on something. And so finding the right space for them to talk with a peer, a colleague, if it's their boss, great, to say, tell me some ways that you use this, to kind of get some insight from others on what does an AI agent mean? How do you actually put it into practice? Wow, it can do that. Okay, what's a smaller version of that? And then going put that into practice. So finding your authentic voice and your understanding of yourself and what you can do. I don't use AI at the same level as some of my team members, but I remember practicing my self-efficacy by asking my team, can you walk me through what you did here? What's the prompt? Paying attention to prompts put into large language models, or looking at some of the ways that AI is reviewing documents to synthesize for me, and making sure that it's giving me the perspectives I'm asking for, but I'm also being intentional about what I'm giving to it. The trying out, the asking questions, being a bit vulnerable and not knowing is going to be scary for some, but it's so important to get past that. And then that strengthens your self-efficacy subdimension itself, as well as really getting that the extrinsic benefit there of knowing that this is going to help my job.
Absolutely. So I mean, AI is a whole big topic that factors into the generations and the and of course the intersection with our cultural backgrounds. I guess here is that we are all experiencing this together across generations, and our reactions to the new technologies are going to differ based on the different generations, based on our experiences. And so we're already seeing this. And so I guess the biggest thing for us is to use CQ to always remember that when we engage with different people, we have to think about our motivation to connect with those differences. We have to think about what's similar or different between between generations in this instance, and generational approaches to artificial intelligence and technology. And then also then move on to say, okay, knowing that, how do we then use CQ strategy to plan better in terms of our interactions? That doesn't mean that I put everybody in a box. Oh, you're a Gen Zer, so you must be really good at this technology stuff. No, but it's about really trying to seek to understand the person in front of you. And then the last one, how do I adapt the way that I engage, knowing that we are experiencing this technology differently and we're coming at it from different angles. And so again, going back to that last question, where I said, what do you think you bring to this work that is generally that AI cannot replace? That last question is the most powerful one, because the answer is almost always relationships, judgment, ethics, creativity, and cultural nuance, the very things that CQ develops. And so no, AI is going to try and replace us, but we won't be replaced, because we are, we've got so much that we bring as humans, and we always have a choice here about using technology to enhance our capabilities and not using that technology to replace us. And so I'm very pro this technology, but at the same time, I really believe that it should enhance human potential and not replace us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful answer. I appreciate I have like the front row seat to this conversation. So it's been such a privilege, because especially as we talk about like the jobs that it can create or that tech has created. I am someone who was younger who got to come up in like the more social media boom. And most of my jobs, if you go for my LinkedIn profile, feel free to connect, are social media manager jobs. And like, even though going through there, one of the big things I learned in community building was, kind of on that self-efficacy piece. People don't like to be the first one to break out of what may be considered groupthink. They can be nervous. So when I was community managing, one of my strategies, a peek behind the scenes here, is if I posed a question, I would then get on a dummy account and then answer that question. So people see they were not the first person to break the ice or something like that. And you would see people then follow suit, because it can be hard to ask questions or go against what everyone else is doing. And I think that's where maybe sometimes in this AI piece, it can be the same thing, that people might be scared to break with their generation or their team culture on AI technology, because they see that it's, kind of as we're talking about that forced organizational view, people might be afraid to break from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we are running a little bit. We only have a few moments left here, but there also was one thing in the chat that, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but someone who is Gen Z in the chat, unfortunately, it's so many things have been reacted to and everything that I've lost their name, so I apologize. But they talked about their fear with AI as Gen Z was partially about what it could mean for things like art and music. And, when we look at those are very key parts of culture. So, how do you see, like, when we see that kind of technology making art and music or other cultural things, what's your opinion on that? What do you think of it? Does it still fit in the culture, or is it its own kind of subculture, different part of it, excluded?
I think there's a it depends answer here, which is our favorite answer with CQ. And so as with every technology, there's always an opportunity for it to improve, for it to help us achieve certain things better than we were able to before. I think what's fundamentally different with AI is where it can actually cut the human out of the creative process. And this is where then this is becoming a challenge. And it's not really cutting the human out of the creative process, it's actually copying so many other humans to create something, which is not the same thing. So it's actually not designing anything new. It's just copying whatever is already out there, and then and so on. So there are some ethical challenges here. But I think when it comes to culture, culture is going to evolve. AI is going to continually move into these spaces and shape how we interact with these things. I was visiting my son-in-law. He's from Nigeria, and he was playing some music videos. He actually had YouTube, the YouTube channel that basically had all of these made up. Some of them were gospel songs and some of them cultural songs, but they were all AI generated. And I literally was like, I cannot stand this, because it's like there could be real people who could have created that music. So I think we're still in this journey, and we all have to come into it with positive as well as critical mindsets in terms of how we engage with this. It's not all bad, it's not all good.
And I think history can teach us a lot as we move forward through this. If we think about how we went from oil paints that would poison artists and the ways that they had to keep them and store them, to acrylic paints, to different mediums of art and music, and going from only being able to play in one space to having travel opportunities. The way that music and art have evolved have gone with the times. And so I feel strongly, especially being in a university where I see young musicians and artists, that this is going to push their creativity beyond. It will annoy, it will frustrate, it might push down. But I think ultimately, when we have repression, art comes out further, it blossoms bigger. And we're going to see artists and musicians find new ways to fight against, but also to bloom in spite of, through new mediums, through new approaches. The way that we've had technology impact positively the music world has only brought us to be able to connect further through music and create new genres and new ways of sharing and new ways of even putting it on sheet paper, right? So I think there's some great opportunities here, but I'm optimistic while still understanding that this is going to be really hard for a lot of folks. And so if I can individually choose to connect with original and human-made art and music, that's what I'll work on doing, and share to others like your son-in-law. Like, maybe let's look at a different YouTube channel here so we can connect,
Yes, absolutely.
support local artists.
Okay, AI shouldn't be a downer on this on this conversation.
But it's all about generations, and it's about the way that we get curious about it. It's the way that we learn and gain our knowledge in it. Think about our cultural values and norms in it, and how do we prepare and adapt and act well. So
yeah, but we do need to have this honest conversation. So I guess let me just throw out my closing statement here. I would just say that at its core, cultural intelligence isn't about mastering every generation or every culture. It's about developing the curiosity and the humility to say, I don't fully understand your worldview or your world yet, but I want to. I want to lead with that. Generational diversity stops being a friction point and becomes exactly what it should be, a competitive advantage.
Wonderful. And Buhle, I think complementary to yours, intentionality is my favorite word at work. My team laughs whenever I say it because I say it so often. Being intentional to connect across difference, asking questions, being humble, being authentic. As you're navigating all of this, I think will really help with it. But if we don't speak up, we're not going to grow through it. And we might stay where we are, which maybe not be the best space for us and for the colleagues that we're with. So being intentional to use this, I think would be great. Awesome.
All right.
So
perfect.
Fun.
We are just up against the hour. Thank you both so much for everything. Mag, I did also want to point out you had a very subtle clock it in there. I appreciated that. I don't know if you got noticed to clock it.
Those
we
who
did throw
know,
out a 6-7, so that's a success.
No.
Until the end.
Oh,
My
no,
4-year-old,
no.
my 4-year-old knows 6-7. Yeah, so let's not.
Yeah, I just got back from camping with my two Gen Z cousins, and I threw 1 6 7 at them, and they were ready to feed me to the bears. So I think before we do any more cringy stuff like that, it is time for us to depart today.
Thank you.
But yes, thank you both so much for joining today. It was a wonderful conversation. To everyone who asked, yes, we will get a recording out of this webinar shortly. It is Friday, so everyone enjoy your weekend if that is coming up. And we'll try to get this webinar out before the end of day to you.
Enjoy the World Cup. Enjoy the World Cup as well.
Let's go the US and Colombia.
Let's go South Africa and Canada.
Poland didn't make it, so I'm cheering just for fun.
Love it.
Go USA.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was fun. Take care. Bye.